Mathew Hartman, the heir to Hartman Industries, had always lived in luxury. Fast cars, lavish parties, and expensive vacations were just part of his everyday life. His father, Raymond Hartman, had built the family empire from the ground up and expected Mathew to follow in his footsteps. But Mathew had little interest in the family business. He lived carelessly, without direction, and showed no signs of responsibility. Raymond had had enough. After a particularly humiliating incident where Mathew's reckless behavior made headlines, Raymond summoned his son to his office. The cold atmosphere of the meeting foreshadowed what was to come. "Mathew," his father began sternly, "I've given you everything you could ever want, but you've wasted it all. You have no respect for hard work or for the family name. So, I'm giving you two options. Either you start working in the company and prove yourself, or you'll be stripped of your privileges and sent out into the world to fend for yourself." Mathew, still hungover from the night before, barely registered his father's words. He smirked. "What? You're going to make me work in one of your factories or something?" Raymond's eyes narrowed. "No, I'm sending you somewhere you'll actually learn what it means to work hard. Starting tomorrow, you'll be working in the local market, earning your way by selling produce. You'll live like everyone else there, with no help from me. If you want your life back, you'll have to prove to me that you understand the value of money, effort, and respect." Mathew's smirk faded. "What? You're sending me to a market? Dad, that's ridiculous. I'm not some street vendor." "It's either that or you leave with nothing," his father said flatly. "The choice is yours." Mathew, shocked and infuriated, stormed out of his father's office. But the gravity of the situation sank in. He knew Raymond was serious. With no other options, Mathew grudgingly agreed, though he vowed to make it as difficult as possible for his father. The next day, Mathew arrived at the bustling outdoor market in an old, worn-out car his father had provided. Dressed in designer clothes that now looked out of place, he was met with curious glances from the market vendors and shoppers. To them, Mathew looked like he didn't belong, and he felt it too. He had been assigned to work at a humble fruit and vegetable stand run by an older vendor named Mr. Ortiz, a no-nonsense man with decades of experience. Mr. Ortiz didn't care who Mathew was or where he came from. To him, Mathew was just another pair of hands to help. Mathew's first day was rough. He had never worked a day in his life and found himself completely out of his element. Lugging crates of fruit, dealing with customers, and handling money all seemed beneath him. His attitude didn't help either. He snapped at customers, rolled his eyes at Mr. Ortiz's instructions, and muttered under his breath whenever things didn't go his way. By midday, Mathew's frustration reached its peak. He nearly walked off the job, but he knew his father was watching. If he quit now, there would be no going back. As the day wore on, Mathew noticed one stall in particular, run by a young woman who seemed to handle everything with ease. Her name was Carla Mendoza, and her fruit stand was the busiest in the market. She moved swiftly, greeting customers with a smile, handling transactions, and expertly arranging her produce. Her confidence and work ethic contrasted sharply with Mathew's own struggles. At the end of the day, as Mathew sat exhausted on a crate, Carla walked by and gave him a knowing smile. "First day, huh?" Mathew glared at her. "Yeah, and it sucks." Carla chuckled. "It's not easy, but you'll get the hang of it. You don't look like you're used to this kind of work." "What gave it away?" Mathew muttered sarcastically. She shrugged. "Just a guess. Good luck tomorrow." And with that, she walked away, leaving Mathew feeling both annoyed and oddly intrigued. Over the next few days, Mathew's arrogance continued to clash with the demands of the market. He hated getting up early, hated the manual labor, and most of all, hated the way people looked at him, as if he didn't belong. Mr. Ortiz grew increasingly frustrated with Mathew's attitude, but he held his tongue, knowing that it was Raymond Hartman's orders to keep Mathew there. One afternoon, after yet another failed attempt to properly handle a customer, Mathew sat in the back of the stall, nursing his bruised ego. He felt utterly out of place, wondering how long he could endure this punishment. That's when Carla came by again. She had noticed Mathew struggling but hadn't said much until now. "You look like you're about to quit," she said, leaning against a nearby stall. "Is it that obvious?" Mathew scoffed. Carla laughed. "Yeah, a little. Look, it's not easy, but you're making it harder for yourself by fighting it. You think we all love working in the market? No, but we do what we have to do." Mathew sighed. "You don't understand. I wasn't meant for this." "Maybe you weren't meant for it, but you're here now," Carla said, her tone softening. "And if you keep acting like this, no one's going to help you." Something about Carla's words struck a chord with Mathew. He had always believed that money and status were all that mattered, but in the market, none of that held any value. These people worked hard for a living, and here he was, acting like a spoiled child. For the first time, Mathew began to see just how far removed he had been from the real world. "Why do you care?" Mathew asked, genuinely curious. Carla shrugged. "Because I've been where you are. I didn't grow up with much, and I had to work for everything I have. But I had to learn the hard way that complaining doesn't make anything better. It just makes the day longer." Mathew fell silent, absorbing her words. Carla wasn't patronizing him. She was speaking from experience. And for the first time, Mathew felt a glimmer of respect for her. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Mathew began to adjust to life in the market. He was still clumsy and inexperienced, but his attitude started to shift. He stopped complaining as much, started paying attention to Mr. Ortiz's instructions, and began interacting with customers more politely. Carla noticed the change, though she didn't comment on it. She would pass by Mathew's stall with a nod of acknowledgement, and occasionally, they would share brief conversations during breaks. Mathew found himself looking forward to those moments, even if he didn't fully understand why. One evening, after the market had closed and the vendors were packing up, Mathew spotted Carla struggling to lift a heavy crate of oranges. Without thinking, he walked over and offered to help. "Need a hand?" he asked, surprising even himself. Carla raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Sure, thanks." As they carried the crate together, Mathew felt an unexpected sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about impressing Carla or proving himself to anyone. It was simply about doing something helpful, something that wasn't for his own gain. After they set the crate down, Carla turned to him. "You're getting better at this," she said with a smile. "Maybe you'll survive after all." Mathew chuckled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Yeah, maybe." As they stood there, the evening sun casting a golden glow over the market, Mathew realized something else. He wasn't just surviving the market anymore. He was starting to enjoy it. And more than that, he was starting to enjoy Carla's company. For the first time in his life, Mathew found himself caring about someone, other than himself. It was a strange feeling, but one that he didn't mind exploring. Unbeknownst to him, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change his life in ways he never could have imagined. Mathew's transformation in the market was slow but noticeable. Though he was still adjusting to his new reality, he began to form unexpected bonds with the people around him, especially Carla. Their interactions grew more frequent, and Mathew found himself seeking out her company, drawn to her grounded nature and warmth. One particularly busy day, Mathew found himself swamped with customers while Mr. Ortiz had stepped away for a break. He struggled to manage the line, fumbling with change and knocking over a crate of apples. Just as he felt panic rising, Carla appeared by his side, effortlessly taking control. She smiled at the customers, quickly calculated the costs, and handed over change with precision. In mere minutes, she had restored order. "Thanks," Mathew said, still catching his breath. "I don't know how you do it." Carla laughed, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. "You just need practice, Mathew. It's all about patience." Mathew felt a strange flutter in his chest as he watched her. She was so natural, so at ease in a situation that would have overwhelmed him just weeks ago. He wasn't used to depending on anyone, but Carla made him feel like he could trust her. "You make it look easy," he admitted. "Trust me, it wasn't always this way. When I first started, I dropped more fruit than I sold. Carla said with a grin. "But eventually, you get the hang of it. You're doing better than you think." The praise felt good coming from her. For the first time, Mathew didn't feel like a failure in this new life. Carla's belief in him was enough to keep him motivated. As the days went by, Mathew found himself lingering after work, chatting with Carla while they packed up their stalls. She shared stories of her childhood, growing up with her family in a small village before moving to the city to help her parents. Mathew, in turn, began to open up about his own life, though he kept the details of his family's wealth hidden. He wanted her to see him for who he was now, not the spoiled rich boy he used to be. Slowly, an unlikely friendship blossomed between them, and though Mathew tried to ignore it, he couldn't deny the growing feelings he had for Carla. She was different from anyone he had ever known. Strong, kind, and completely unaffected by the material world he once lived in. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the market, Mathew and Carla were sitting on a bench, sharing a bag of freshly roasted peanuts. They had fallen into an easy routine of spending time together after work, and Mathew cherished these quiet moments. "I never asked you," Carla said, tossing a peanut into her mouth. "Why did you start working here? You don't seem like the kind of guy who grew up in the market." Mathew tensed slightly. He had been careful not to reveal too much about his past, but Carla's question caught him off guard. He could feel her curious gaze on him, waiting for an answer. "Well, let's just say I needed a change," Mathew said, choosing his words carefully. "My dad thought it would be good for me to learn how to work from the ground up, said I needed to earn my way." Carla nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "That's pretty admirable. Most people wouldn't stick it out if they didn't have to." Mathew smiled faintly. "Yeah, I guess." But inside, Mathew felt a flicker of guilt. He still hadn't told Carla the whole truth, that his father was Raymond Hartman, one of the wealthiest men in the country, and that this market job was more of a punishment than a necessity. He wondered how she would react if she knew the truth. Would she see him differently? Would she pull away? He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the moment they were sharing. For now, he was just Mathew, the guy working at a market stand, and that was enough. The weeks passed, and Mathew's skills in the market improved. He no longer stumbled over simple tasks or dreaded the long hours. In fact, he began to take pride in his work. Mr. Ortiz, though gruff as ever, gave him a nod of approval one day as they closed up shop. "You're not so useless after all," Mr. Ortiz said with a grunt. Mathew couldn't help but smile at the backhanded compliment. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing something worthwhile, something that didn't rely on his family name or wealth. But it wasn't just the work that made his days in the market bearable. It was Carla. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized how much she had come to mean to him. Her laughter, her strength, the way she treated everyone with kindness, it all drew him in like a magnet. One evening, as they walked together through the now empty market, Mathew found himself watching her more closely. The soft glow of the streetlights illuminated her face, and for a moment, he forgot about everything else. He forgot about his father's ultimatum, the expectations placed on him, and even the life he had left behind. "Carla," he said suddenly, his voice softer than usual. She looked up at him, her eyes curious. "Yeah." Mathew hesitated. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say, only that he wanted to be closer to her. But before he could speak, a loud crash echoed from a nearby stall, and they both jumped in surprise. "Let's go check it out," Carla said, immediately moving toward the noise. Mathew followed her, grateful for the distraction, though a part of him was disappointed. He had been so close to telling her how he felt, how she had changed everything for him. As they inspected the source of the noise, it turned out to be nothing more than a cat knocking over a crate. But Mathew couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed an important moment. As Mathew's feelings for Carla deepened, so did the tension between him and his father. Raymond Hartman had been keeping tabs on his son's progress, and while he was impressed by Mathew's growing responsibility, he was still waiting for proof that Mathew had truly changed. One evening, after a long day at the market, Mathew returned to his small apartment only to find his father waiting for him. Raymond stood in the dimly lit living room, his expression unreadable. "Mathew," he said calmly, "we need to talk." Mathew sighed, already dreading the conversation. "What now, Dad?" "I've been hearing about your progress," Raymond said, taking a seat. "You're doing better than I expected, but this isn't over yet." Mathew leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "What do you want from me? I'm working hard. I'm learning. Isn't that enough?" Raymond's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just about you learning how to work. It's about you learning who you are. And from what I've heard, you've been spending a lot of time with someone. A girl." Mathew tensed. "That's none of your business." "It is if you're lying to her," Raymond said, his voice sharp. "Does she know who you really are? Does she know that you're the heir to Hartman Industries?" Mathew's stomach churned. He had managed to keep his identity a secret from Carla, but he knew it couldn't last forever. Still, the thought of her finding out the truth terrified him. What if she thought he was just another spoiled rich kid pretending to be something he wasn't? "I'm not lying to her," Mathew said defensively. "I just haven't told her everything yet." Raymond stood up, his presence filling the room. "You need to decide, Mathew. If you want to prove that you've changed, you have to start being honest, with yourself and with her. Otherwise, you'll lose everything." As his father left, Mathew stood in silence, torn between the life he was trying to leave behind and the future he wanted to build with Carla. The truth was out there, waiting to be revealed. But once it was, there would be no going back. Mathew couldn't shake the conversation with his father. Raymond's words echoed in his mind, urging him to tell Carla the truth, but the fear of losing her weighed heavily on him. Over the next few days, he became more distant, unable to fully engage with the life he had built at the market. He was distracted, torn between his love for Carla and the reality of his privileged background. One evening, as they packed up their stalls, Carla noticed the change in him. She wiped her hands on a cloth and frowned, her eyes searching his face. "Mathew, is everything okay? You've been different lately." He looked up at her, his heart pounding. This was the moment. He could no longer keep his secret from her. It wasn't fair to her or their relationship. Taking a deep breath, he decided to confess everything. "There's something I need to tell you," Mathew began, his voice unsteady. "I haven't been completely honest about who I am." Carla's brows furrowed, and she stepped closer, concern etched across her face. "What do you mean? What are you hiding?" Mathew swallowed hard, his throat dry. "My name, it's Mathew Hartman. My family, my father, is Raymond Hartman. We're one of the wealthiest families in the country. This job, working at the market, it's part of my father's way of teaching me responsibility. He thought I needed to learn what it meant to work hard." Carla stared at him in disbelief, her hands falling to her sides. "Wait, you're telling me that all this time, you've been a millionaire, a Hartman, and you didn't think to tell me?" "I didn't know how," Mathew said quickly, stepping forward. "I didn't want you to think of me as some spoiled rich guy. I wanted you to see me for who I really am." Carla's lips tightened as she turned away, clearly hurt by his revelation. Mathew could see the disappointment in her eyes. She felt betrayed, and rightly so. "I don't know what to say," she finally muttered. "I thought you were different. I thought you were like me." "I am," Mathew insisted, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. "Carla, I may have grown up wealthy, but this, working with you, being around you, it's changed me. You've changed me." Carla shook her head, the hurt still evident. "But you lied. You could have told me the truth from the beginning. Now I don't even know who you are." Mathew felt a lump forming in his throat. He wanted to explain, to make her understand that he wasn't the person he used to be, that his feelings for her were real. But the damage was done. Carla needed time to process everything. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you." Without another word, Carla turned and walked away, leaving Mathew standing alone in the fading light. For the first time since he met her, he wasn't sure if she would ever come back. Days turned into weeks, and Mathew's life at the market felt emptier than ever. Carla avoided him, and when they did cross paths, she barely spoke a word to him. The friendship and bond they had built seemed shattered, and Mathew could feel the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. Work became monotonous, and without Carla's presence, Mathew struggled to find the same joy in it. Mr. Ortiz noticed the change in him, grumbling about how Mathew had lost his spark. But Mathew couldn't focus on anything but the emptiness he felt in Carla's absence. One evening, after closing up the market stall, Mathew decided to seek her out. He couldn't let things end this way, not when he knew how much she meant to him. He walked through the familiar streets, searching for her until he spotted her sitting on a bench by the river, staring out at the water. Mathew approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Carla," he said softly. She glanced at him but didn't speak. He took that as a sign to continue. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Mathew began, sitting beside her. "And I understand why you're upset. You had every right to be. I should have told you the truth from the start." Carla sighed, finally looking at him. Her expression was softer than before, though the hurt was still there. "It's not just about you being rich, Mathew. It's about trust. You kept such a big part of your life hidden from me. How am I supposed to know if I can trust you now?" Mathew nodded, understanding her point. "You're right. I made a mistake. But I'm not that person anymore. The guy who only cared about money and status. Working here, meeting you, it's changed me. I've learned what it means to really work for something, to care about people beyond what they can give you." Carla looked away, her eyes focusing on the river again. "I don't know, Mathew. I need time." Mathew's heart sank, but he nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll be here." With that, he stood up and walked away, leaving Carla to her thoughts. He didn't know if she would ever forgive him, but he was willing to wait, to prove that he was worth a second chance. As Mathew dealt with the fallout of his confession to Carla, another challenge loomed on the horizon. His father, Raymond, had grown impatient. He had given Mathew months to prove himself, and now he wanted to see results. One evening, Mathew received a call from his father, demanding a meeting. They met at a high-end restaurant, a stark contrast to the simple life Mathew had grown accustomed to. Raymond looked as imposing as ever, his sharp suit and calculating gaze reminding Mathew of the world he had left behind. "I've given you plenty of time, Mathew," Raymond began, his tone cold. "Now it's time for you to come back to the family business. You've done your stint in the market, now it's time to get serious." Mathew bristled at his father's words. He had changed during his time away, and the thought of returning to the cold, corporate world didn't sit well with him. "I'm not ready to come back yet," he said firmly. "I'm still figuring things out." Raymond's eyes narrowed. "You've had enough time to figure things out. I didn't send you to the market to play around with some girl. I sent you there to learn responsibility." Mathew clenched his fists, trying to keep his anger in check. "This isn't about Carla. It's about me. I've learned more in the past few months than I ever did working for you." Raymond leaned back in his chair, his expression hard. "You're making a mistake, Mathew. If you don't come back now, you might lose everything." Mathew's jaw tightened, but he stood his ground. "If losing everything means keeping my integrity and the people I care about, then I'll take that risk." Raymond's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't argue. Instead, he simply stood up, throwing a few bills on the table. "We'll see how long that lasts." As his father walked away, Mathew felt a surge of defiance. He was done living under his father's thumb. For the first time in his life, he was choosing his own path, no matter the consequences. Weeks passed, and though Mathew and Carla hadn't fully reconciled, the tension between them had lessened. Carla still kept her distance, but she no longer avoided him completely. There was a sense of understanding between them, though they hadn't yet talked about the future. One day, while working at the market, Mathew noticed Carla struggling to carry a heavy crate. Without thinking, he rushed over to help her, lifting the crate with ease. "Thanks," she said, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I guess I'm not as strong as I thought." Mathew smiled. You're stronger than you know." They stood there for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Carla broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about everything, and I think I understand why you didn't tell me the truth right away. It doesn't make it right, but I get it." Mathew's heart lifted with hope. "Does that mean?" Carla nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm willing to give us, another chance, but you have to promise me no more secrets." Mathew grinned, his heart pounding with relief and happiness. "No more secrets, I promise." As they stood together in the busy market, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of daily life, Mathew realized that he had found something far more valuable than the wealth and status his father had always prized. He had found a connection, a love that was built on trust, honesty, and shared experiences. And for the first time, Mathew knew exactly where he belonged. With Carla's willingness to give their relationship another chance, Mathew felt a new sense of determination to prove himself worthy of her trust. He was still haunted by the memory of how hurt she had been when she found out about his true identity, and he knew that it would take time to fully mend the cracks in their relationship. In the weeks that followed, Mathew committed himself to their stall at the market more than ever. He worked tirelessly alongside Carla, shouldering the burdens of the business without complaint. He no longer cared about his father's threats or the future of the Hartman empire. This simple, fulfilling life with Carla was what he wanted. The market stall became a symbol of their new beginning. It was where they shared laughter and hardships, where they faced challenges together as equals. Mathew made a point of being completely transparent with Carla, even about small things. Whether it was a decision about the business or something as mundane as what he had for breakfast, Mathew knew that building trust meant being open in all aspects of life. For her part, Carla was still cautious. She watched Mathew closely, looking for any signs that he might slip back into the arrogance or entitlement she had once feared. But as the days passed, she found herself believing in him again. She saw how hard he worked, how genuine his intentions were, and slowly, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. One day, as they packed up their stall after another busy day, Carla looked over at Mathew, who was counting the day's earnings. "You've really changed," she said softly, her voice filled with a mix of admiration and wonder. Mathew looked up at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Carla smiled, shaking her head slightly. "You're not the same guy I met months ago. The one who used to be afraid to get his hands dirty, who didn't understand what it meant to work hard. You've become, well, someone I can actually see myself with." Mathew's heart swelled with hope. He walked over to her, taking her hand in his. "I did it all for you," he confessed. "You made me realize what was important in life. Not the money, not the status, but this, working side by side with you, living honestly." Carla's smile widened, and for the first time since they had reconciled, she leaned in and kissed him. It was a soft, lingering kiss, but it carried with it all the emotions they had been holding back for so long. It was a kiss that promised a future built on mutual respect and love. As they stood there, locked in each other's embrace, Mathew knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with Carla by his side. Despite the happiness, Mathew and Carla were building. The looming shadow of Mathew's father, Raymond, continued to hang over them. Mathew had defied his father's expectations and had chosen a life far different from the one planned for him. But Raymond wasn't the type of man to let go of control so easily. One afternoon, as Mathew and Carla were preparing to open their stall, they heard the unmistakable sound of a luxury car pulling up nearby. Mathew's stomach churned when he saw the familiar sleek black vehicle park in front of the market. His father stepped out, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that screamed power and authority. Raymond walked toward them with the confidence of a man who owned the world. Mathew could already feel the tension building as his father approached. "Mathew," Raymond said in a curt tone, his eyes scanning the market stall with obvious distaste. "So this is what you've chosen over the family business? Over everything I've built for you?" Mathew stood his ground, refusing to be intimidated. "This is what I've chosen," he replied calmly, "and I'm happy with it." Raymond's gaze shifted to Carla, who stood silently by Mathew's side. "And you," Raymond said, his voice cold, "you're the reason my son has abandoned his responsibilities?" Carla stiffened, but Mathew quickly stepped in. "Don't talk to her like that," he warned. "This was my decision, not hers. Carla didn't make me leave the business. You did, with your constant pressure and expectations." Raymond's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Mathew saw the fury in his father's expression. But then, just as quickly, Raymond's face softened, his tone taking on a more calculated edge. "You're my son, Mathew," Raymond said, his voice smooth. "And no matter what, you can't escape who you are. You were born into wealth, into power. This little venture," he gestured toward the stall dismissively, "it's not your future. You're meant for greater things." Mathew clenched his fists, feeling a surge of anger rise within him. "I don't want your version of greater things," he shot back. "I want a life where I can be happy, where I can be with someone who loves me for who I am, not for my last name." Raymond looked at him, his expression unreadable. "You're making a mistake, Mathew, but I'll give you one last chance. Come back to the family. Run the company as you were meant to. And in return, I'll make sure this woman," he glanced at Carla again, "never has to struggle a day in her life." Mathew felt a wave of disgust wash over him. He couldn't believe his father was still trying to manipulate him, using Carla as a bargaining chip. "No," Mathew said firmly, "I'm not coming back. I've made my choice." Raymond's face hardened, the cold, ruthless businessman emerging once more. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth, "but don't come crawling back to me when this fantasy crumbles, because I won't be there to pick up the pieces." With that, Raymond turned on his heel and walked back to his car, leaving Mathew and Carla standing in silence. As the car drove away, Mathew let out a long breath, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. He had officially severed ties with his father, and while it felt liberating, it also left him with a sense of finality. There was no going back now. Carla placed a hand on his arm, offering silent support. Mathew looked down at her, grateful for her presence. He knew that no matter what happened next, they would face it together. With Raymond's departure, Mathew and Carla felt a renewed sense of purpose. They continued to grow their market stall, expanding their offerings and building a loyal customer base. Word spread about their quality products and the friendly, hardworking couple behind the stall, and soon they were making more money than they ever expected. One evening, after a particularly successful day at the market, Mathew and Carla sat together on a bench, watching the sunset. Mathew couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. From a life of privilege and entitlement, he had found real meaning in this simple, fulfilling existence. "You know," Mathew said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never thought I'd be this happy. I used to think that success meant power, money, and control. But now I realize that it's about the people you surround yourself with. It's about love." Carla smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I never imagined that my life would take this turn either," she admitted, "but I'm glad it did. You've shown me that there's more to people than what's on the surface." Mathew chuckled softly. "I guess we've both learned a lot." They sat in peaceful silence for a while longer, content in each other's company. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Mathew felt a surge of emotion rising within him. He reached into his pocket, his heart pounding. "Carla," he said softly, turning to face her. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with curiosity. Mathew took a deep breath and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "I know we've been through a lot," he began, his voice steady despite the nervousness he felt. "And I know I'm not perfect, but I also know that I love you more than anything. You've changed my life, and I want to spend the rest of it with you." Carla's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the ring, then back at Mathew. She smiled through the tears, nodding slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Mathew, I'll marry you." Mathew's heart soared as he slipped the ring onto her finger. They kissed, sealing their promise to one another under the golden light of the setting sun. As they held each other close, Mathew knew that he had finally found the life he had always wanted. Not one of wealth and power, but one of love, happiness, and a future built on trust and partnership. With their engagement now official, Mathew and Carla began to plan their future together. They talked about expanding the business, maybe even opening a small shop to sell their goods. But most importantly, they talked about building a family, a life filled with love and laughter. Mathew's relationship with his father remained strained, but he no longer felt the same pressure to live up to Raymond's expectations. He had made peace with the fact that they would likely never see eye to eye, but he was content knowing that he had chosen the life that made him truly happy. Carla, too, found herself more at peace than she had ever been. She no longer felt the need to prove herself or hide her vulnerabilities. With Mathew by her side, she knew that they could face anything the world threw at them. Together, they had built a life that was not defined by wealth or status, but by the love they shared and the joy they found in each day. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.